Welcome back to Lifting with Lions. We have a really interesting topic to talk about today that's a bit different than what we've talked about before, but let me introduce it by a little experience I had last week, and it got Tenny and I talking. But my wife, since I'm a smaller guy, she's a smaller girl, the ideal body type, she actually said her ideal body type is someone like Tom Holland, smaller but fit, whatever. And usually when she uses the word massive, talking about somebody's muscles, it's in like a negative connotation because that's just not the body type she's attracted to, right? So the other day, I have my shirt off and she's like, wow, you look massive. And I understand now that she meant it as a compliment, but for me, I'm like, am I getting too big? So I talked to Tenny about it, and I started saying, I realize that I'm not really big, but the way I see myself is actually really small. When people tell me that I'm looking bigger or more athletic, I don't really see it. And so he started talking about this subject of how we kind of live in our own skin and we don't see ourselves exactly accurately, I guess. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, is we all kind of have a lens that we see the world with. And that doesn't just affect how we live through everyday situations, how we take things in stride. I think it also affects how we perceive ourselves physically. And so I guess to relate to that, I've been lifting for years. And no matter how much I lift or how muscular I get, I still have days where I feel like I'm not muscular at all, where I feel like I'm pretty unimpressive for how much work I've done and that I would never like stand out in a crowd or anything, even though the goal of what I'm doing isn't to necessarily appeal to other people. It's still, I don't know. It's kind of like a confidence hit sometimes where you feel like others might not think what you've done is impressive.
Yeah.
And so, and obviously, I mean, as you told me when I was saying that in the gym, that's not true, you know?
Yeah, I mean, here's a shameless plug. You should be looking at our socials, Lifting with Lions, and Tenny's posted at least 1 or 2 pictures of himself. And I think the average person would say, wow, that guy is fit. He's muscular. You could tell even if he's wearing a long sleeve shirt or whatever. So that's just a little context.
Well, and what's interesting about that is one reason why on socials and stuff. So I've never posted like a shirtless picture of myself in my whole life.
Right.
Because, and we'll talk about this a bit. We're going to talk about body dysmorphic disorder today. And while I don't have body dysmorphic disorder, I have similar symptoms of it, I guess, because you have to have certain criteria be met before you could ever like be diagnosed with that. And it's nowhere near that serious for me, but most people have some symptoms of it.
Yeah, but it's probably not too different from when all the girls are like, oh my gosh, I'm so OCD because...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like you're not actually OCD, but you might be particular,
right?
Or some things might bother you. And I think this applies to everybody. But I did actually once upon a time kind of date a girl with this kind of disorder. And I was young. I was 16, so I didn't understand it, but she was a ballerina. She was a ballet dancer, extremely skinny, very fit, like about as skinny as a girl can get and still be decently
not classified
healthy.
As like anorexic category.
Yes, and I don't know exactly what I kind of understood at some point that she may have had some sort of eating disorders, but I don't want to imply that. I'm not sure.
Right.
But the point is, she'd talk about herself and she'd be like, I wish I could lose weight. I feel fat. I'm like, you are not fat. Anybody could look at you. You've got like abs and you're extremely skinny. Everybody knows you're not fat. But my mind couldn't comprehend it. Like, how can you think you're fat? Look in the mirror. You're obviously not. That's not possible. They don't come skinnier than you.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where... because something interesting about body dysmorphic disorders, we'll talk about this a bit today, is that sometimes there's like misdiagnoses that go on between these categories and these psychological situations. And a lot of people get diagnosed with body dysmorphic disorder who would better fit an eating disorder diagnosis.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So there's definitely a lot of overlap between, let's say, someone who's anorexic and someone who has body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Because both of them may see themselves differently than reality implies.
Yeah.
And it might also be stemming to the same thing where they both think they're too fat or they're gaining weight or they're not fit and they don't look attractive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But there's further criteria that kind of further forks at the road.
So how would
and
you
takes it
define
further
that?
than that? Define what?
Just body dysmorphic disorder. What's the difference between that and just what we were talking about, living in your own skin and not seeing the big difference?
So body dysmorphic disorder, and I'm going to rip this straight off the Mayo Clinic's website, just so I get their exact kind of explanation for it. They say, body dysmorphic disorder is a mental health disorder in which you can't stop thinking about one or more perceived defects or flaws in your appearance, a flaw that appears minor or cannot be seen by others, but you may feel so embarrassed, ashamed, or anxious that you may avoid many social situations. So that's the base kind of definition of it. And you can see that you would see something like that, and also you could see how that would apply to something like anorexia.
Yeah.
And it kind of diverges farther, like I said. And so if we go into the diagnosis criteria of that, it talks about how you have appearance preoccupation, which is where you, for even up to hours a day, you're distressing about how you look. And you're obsessed with appearance flaws. And they have a lot of repetitive behaviors that can tie into that. So something like excessive grooming or picking your skin or constantly changing your clothes throughout the day because you don't like how you look, or constantly having to assess how you look in a mirror, like constantly every 15 minutes sometimes when it's severe.
Yeah.
You just have to know how you look constantly. And it also has to have significant distress or impairment on your social life or your occupational life. So it has to be severe enough to warrant that clinical significance. And so they have a little category here on how it differs from an eating disorder. And so they say, this is on the Mayo Clinic again, mayoclinic.org. If the appearance preoccupations focus on being too fat or weighing too much, the clinician must determine that these concerns are not better explained by an eating disorder. If the patient's only appearance concern focuses on excessive fat or weight, and the patient's symptoms meet diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder, then he or she should be diagnosed with an eating disorder and not BDD, which is body dysmorphic disorder. However, if diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder are not met, then BDD can be diagnosed as concerns with fat or weight in a person of normal weight can be a symptom of BDD. So it's not uncommon for people to have both eating disorders and BDD. So I think it's important, and this is something I've seen a lot online lately, is it's important to not rush into self-diagnosing yourself with something.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of like a self-fulfillment prophecy type thing that can occur where if you think you have a certain disorder, you tend to replicate those behaviors more naturally.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That could be a lot to do with like the OCD thing we were talking about.
Yeah, if you're
say,
actually convinced that you have like diagnosable OCD, then you may start like replicating those behaviors because you're convincing yourself that you have them.
Yeah, I've even noticed people before OCD was like a big thing that people were talking about. I mean, these days people say it almost as a joke, but I've found people are more obsessive over small things now that they know that OCD exists, where it might not have bothered them before.
And the important thing about getting something diagnosed by a clinician is that it opens up resources to you.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that you know you have it and then everything's going to be better. It's that you have these resources available now.
Yeah.
And they understand what this disorder is better than you do, so they can help you. But if you self-diagnose yourself with something and you look it up online, you go, oh, that's what I have. You've only kind of exasperated your own anxiety of that topic, but you also haven't opened up those resources to yourself because it's not like you're talking to a clinician.
Yeah.
So it's a dangerous spot to put yourself in because it can just kind of stress you out even more when you may not even have the disorder.
Yeah.
So self-diagnosing is something I don't recommend.
Yeah, in most cases, that's probably true.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to talk to a doctor about how I'm starting to look a little bit like a Dorito, and we'll see what they say.
Yeah, you might have Dorito disorder.
Dorito disorder.
Yeah.
The doctor's like, this is a new one for me.
There's only been one other person to ever have this. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger himself.
He walked in and he's like, I think I'm a Dorito.
But when I was saying that it can be different flaws, it doesn't have to be weight. It can be something as simple as your bicep size. If you're a guy who's been at the gym a long time,
Yeah.
You just have this complex where you never think that your biceps are growing, and you might have 17-inch arms, which is really impressive. But that might be your thing that you perceive differently, or
Yeah.
it could even be height. I mean, you could be so, I don't know. Because it can stem from a lot of things. It can stem from childhood trauma, for example, and teasing.
Yeah.
So let's say you're a young kid in middle school and you get teased for being short and people make fun of you, and it traumatizes you to an extent that even when you hit a growth spurt and grow into a normal height range, you still feel short.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily believe that you've grown taller, and you still have that kind of suppressed feeling of inadequacy that you've tied to that trait.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways that this can come in. And I think for me, I mean, obviously I don't qualify to be
Clinically.
diagnosed with that because I don't have any like obsessive like behaviors.
Yeah.
And it doesn't impede any of my social life or my occupational life. But the one part I do like relate to is that no matter how much progress I make, there are plenty of days where I feel like I just am not impressive at all with my physique and what I've accomplished in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And I mean, even when I hit like 16.5-inch arms for the first time, I thought it was like really impressive that day, and I was super like proud of that. And then even within a week, I was like, man, my arms like don't feel that big though. They feel kind of small.
Yeah.
And so it's something that can carry on, but it's something that I'm aware of and that I have to constantly check with myself and go, obviously this isn't realistic. And I think the biggest reason that it occurs, I think there's two things. I think it stems from when I was a kid. I got bullied a ton in school because I was always a lot chubbier, and I got made fun of for it. And when I was in high school, I don't even know why, honestly. I was like a chubby kid, but I wasn't like stand out of the crowd,
Right.
And I had acne that was pretty bad, but it wasn't like stand out of the crowd. I just had
It's pretty normal.
a couple select people and groups of people for the years of school when I was a kid who just picked me out for some reason
Yeah.
and just went after me. And I think that stuff kind of got to me in terms of self-worth
Yeah.
because I didn't have any athletic prowess at all. I played no sports. I wasn't good at any sports. My family and my parents are a lot more intellectuals than they are physical performers. Both my parents are teachers. My dad's a philosopher and philosophy professor, and it's just a lot more focus on the academics in my house than being like a really athletic family.
Yeah.
And I was that kid in my family who was different than the rest of my family because I really, really, really wanted to be an athlete. But I wasn't outgoing enough to ever like push to have my parents let me join a team. So I just stayed out of it. And because I never went after it, I just thought that it was never something I could be good at. And that paired with just people kind of pushing you down just gets you to the point that now that I can pursue something athletic, and when I got into jiu-jitsu like 5 years ago and I started really getting into stuff, no matter how much I progressed, I still had that mindset of this is something I can never be good at because of how it was for me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so I've definitely gotten past that a lot now because I realized jiu-jitsu was something I really excelled at. But it took like a year and a half before I was willing to admit myself that I might be good at something.
Yeah.
And even now with bodybuilding and weightlifting, I've hit a physique that I think is pretty impressive for what I've put into it. But I still have times where I think it's not anything to be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to constantly, being aware of that, I have to constantly reassure myself and kind of take proactive measures to look at those thoughts and say, these aren't realistic and they aren't grounded.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this stuff comes with, well, you shouldn't be self-diagnosing. I think that self-realization is a good thing, to kind of realize what's going on and to be able to identify areas of concern. Then you can either speak to a clinician or something, or you can, kind of like I did, you can see something that you realize might not be the same in reality as it is in your head.
Yeah.
And just start trying to actively change your thought pattern.
Yeah.
Think about it a different way.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I would probably be so bold as to say that anybody that's interested in exercising or getting more fit or making their body look better has some form of this. And I would say the average person would think that Tenny and I are pretty normal people. We don't really have super deep rooted traumas. At least I can't speak for Tenny, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it. And for me, I don't think so either, but I can definitely say in high school, for example, I'm a guy that's 5'5", and it's one of those jokes that's kind of true, but a lot of girls are like, I would only ever date a guy that's 6 feet or taller. And not to mention, I've been anywhere in my life probably between 100 and like, I don't know, 12 pounds at the heaviest and 106 at the lightest.
Does that leave you deep disdain for me being 6'2"?
No, actually, but I did realize, I guess it never really bothered me in the moment, but I think deep down, it kind of made me sad that a lot of girls wouldn't give me a chance.
Totally.
They would pass me up. I never got asked to dances by girls. I would ask some girls and they wouldn't be interested. And that's not to say that I was like some poor outcast kid, but I know for a fact that my looks and my height did have some effect on my dating life.
Well, and it's almost become a meme.
Yeah.
Because of how common it is.
It is, yeah.
Because unironically, people will put in their dating profiles, won't swipe on people under 6 feet.
Yeah.
Like, it's common enough that it's become like widespread joked about.
Yeah.
Because so many people actually think that way.
Yeah.
Which blows my mind.
Yep. The one phrase I believed more in high school than anything was nice guys finish last. I was like, I always legitimately believed that if girls would just give me a chance and let me take them on dates, that I would make it the greatest date ever. Because I'm a creative guy. I'm really fun. But, you know, I was like, I treat them like a gentleman. I open doors. I've taken etiquette classes when I was younger. I know how to treat a lady. I'm funny, creative, you know, all those things. But girls just didn't want to go, and it was because of a physical appearance. And I think that's kind of carried through in some ways. Now, small is my identity.
Totally.
Being 5'5" and really thin and not any muscles has become an identity for me. So when I look at myself and look back at old pictures of me, I know for a fact that I weigh like 10 pounds more than I used to, almost completely in muscle. Maybe not completely, but a lot of it is muscle mass. And I know for a fact from just measuring myself that I'm definitely bigger, and people tell me, I can definitely tell you're working out. You look much bigger. But I look at me in the mirror and in those pictures and I can't see a difference.
And I think part of that is what you just said, is that we kind of build these identities for ourselves.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, I had the same thing. I mean, I asked 3 girls to prom and all of them said no. They were hoping someone else would ask them.
Yeah.
And I was a very awkward looking kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely was not attractive in high school. But because of that, I kind of had to rely on being like a class clown kind of kid.
Yeah.
I had to focus on being funny because that's what I was good at, and I could make anyone laugh.
Yeah.
So every time I meet someone, even today, I'm always like the funny guy in the group. But that kind of became my identity, was like the funny guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of limits you, because now where I get into professional situations, I don't want to be the funny guy, you know?
Right.
I want to be the reliable employee.
Man, we should have told our listeners to bring tissues. Just tearing up
So
here.
sad. But it's kind of like that self-fulfillment thing again, is you identify yourself as the funny guy, and while in the meantime, it might be because it's making up for certain things you lack.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to kind of compete. If you let that become who you are, it becomes hard to step out of that identity later. Mm-hmm. Especially when, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being funny, but there might be other things you want to be
Are you
known
compensating?
For.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that segues perfectly into why it was so surreal for you to be like told that you looked massive by your wife, and why it instantly feels not believable.
Yeah, I felt unattractive because she said it. Because I was like, I'm not massive, and you think that massive guys are gross, so what? Do you think I'm gross because I look different? Because I was leaving. Now that we're talking about it, it makes sense, like a light bulb. I was kind of leaving in that moment that identity that I've had for myself for so many years, because I'm not massive. I'm a 106-pound skinny kid, you know?
Yeah.
Short, skinny, that's who I am. And I got a wife who was into that, so that's great. But yeah, when she's like, you're massive, I'm like, that's not me. Now I don't feel attractive because I don't feel like me or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good to talk about this, especially when we've been talking about diet and weight loss, because I think a lot of this is creating a new identity for who you are, kind of updating it. And I listened to a book, if I can throw this out there, that talked about our lives kind of like a garden. When we're born, we're given a plot of land, and as we're raised, we have our parents and our communities and our friends and whoever else. They start planting seeds and tending them for us.
Is this the Bible?
It's the Bible. Yes. This is the word of God. So, no. But basically what happens is by the time you grow up into adolescence and get the reins on your own garden, you don't even know what's in it. You know?
Yeah.
You're just discovering that in your own plot of land, maybe these seeds, maybe these plants don't grow, don't grow well in your plot of land. Maybe these are seeds you don't want. Maybe they left a bunch of weeds and a bunch of garbage because they didn't really care for you or they didn't mean to.
Yeah.
So you've got to go through. It's now your job to care for the plants that you want and nurture those, to pull out the bad plants that you don't want in your life. But if you don't think of it like that, then you're not going to do anything to your garden, your figurative garden. You're going to keep believing that you're the small, skinny kid or the fat kid that's only funny or whatever. You're going to keep believing that until you really go through your own garden and figure out who you want to be now.
Absolutely. And kind of figuring out who you want to be is important for your health.
Yeah.
Because when you're distracted by kind of these unattainable images that we have for ourselves, a lot of times that can lead to just unhealthy behavior or obsession, but it can lead to like really extreme measures too.
So I apologize. This is the voice of the future Jared. After recording this episode, we realized that it turned out to be quite a long episode, and we've been attempting to keep these ones shorter. So we're splitting this episode here, and you can hear the rest of the episode next week. So again, we're sorry, but there's so much more exciting stuff to come, I can tell you, because I've been there, and I'm speaking to you from the future. I'm the ghost of Christmas. What is it? Present? Christmas future, I guess. Yeah.
Christmas
Is that the
future.
freaky one that's like, that doesn't even talk?
Yeah, it's the one who shows everyone they're dead or something.
Yeah. So spoiler alert, it turns out Tanny and
We all
Jared
die.
are dead by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Anyways, join us next time on Lifting with Lions. It's good stuff, I promise.